dramatic intro anymore, since we kind of already had an intro. Gabby looked up from her desk and saw the young man standing in front of her. She rarely forgets a face, which makes her particularly good at her job as receptionist at Acme Dev, and immediately remembered him from the round of interviews conducted at the office a month or so ago. She noticed that he was unusually well dressed for the environment, and she smiled as she made a wager with herself, giving him about 2 weeks before he tries to fit in. Her smile dissipated a bit as she repeated to herself, "They all try to fit in here." "How can you not know this?" snarked Mike, Frank's technical lead, as he got up from beside Frank. "I expect our engineers to be well versed in big O notation and be able to reason around it. I mean, you should have covered this in college. You did actually go there, right?" The room was quiet as Frank searched desperately for an answer to the seemingly rhetorical question. He vaguely remembered the topic, but he hasn't used it in the last 10 years since he started coding professionally. "I'll spend some time tonight to get back up to speed," Frank responded, wondering what else he would need to dig into while he was at it. Frank's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., but it didn't matter. Frank was already tossing around in bed, trying to figure out what he was going to say at today's stand-up. The task he's been working on has been taking much longer than expected. He provided the team with a working solution a week ago, but for some reason his work was never good enough. He's been at Acme Dev for only about 2 months, but felt like a complete failure. Something that has been steadily feeding the bad case of imposter syndrome he's been fighting. He has always received good commendations on his work at every other employer. "What is going on with me?" he badgered himself. "I'll just have to buckle down and put in even more hours," he thought, as the sickness in his stomach forced him out of bed. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this talk about burnout. I don't know about you, but I'm quite happy I'm not Frank anymore in any case. Hopefully it didn't sound too familiar for some people in the room. As we've already been introduced, I'm Riaan Plessis and it's my lovely wife Tanya. We are in fact married, so our surname is not a statistical anomaly that we have the same surname. And we're really excited to be sharing on this topic with you, simply because we've personally experienced how destructive this can be. And we really hope that this talk will add value to your lives as well. So, today we're going to cover the topic in 3 different sections. Firstly, we're going to talk about what exactly is burnout. And we're also going to talk a bit about who we are and how our makeup and personalities and stuff like that contributes to burnout. And Tanya and I are going to share a bit what did we do and what are we still doing when faced with this thing, so things might get real. For those of you that may or may not know, earlier this year we conducted a survey in the SAIT industry to try and determine the level of burnout awareness in our industry, and we'll be sharing some of that information as well. And we'll continue to follow the story of Frank, so to see where he ends up, stay tuned. So let's get going. So what is burnout? Now, one of the official definitions of burnout is the following, that states, burnout is the extinction of motivation or incentive, especially where one's devotion to a cause or relationship fails to produce the desired results. Now, if any of you are like me, I don't like definitions like these. They use a lot of big words and I find them difficult to understand. But what this basically describes is a situation where someone is extremely committed but they lack motivation. A definition of burnout that I much more prefer is the following, that simply states that burnout is the high cost of high achievement. Now, the reason why I like this definition more is not because I can actually understand it, but more because the first time I read it, it kind of hit something inside of me, and I came to realize what I was aiming for my whole life was, in fact, maybe just killing me. Now, both these definitions I just shared was coined by a man with the name Herbert Freudenberger. Now, Herbert was a psychiatrist who worked with drug addicts in the 1970s. He ran a after-hours clinic along with some volunteers, and after some time, he started noticing something very strange with his volunteers, in that they became very similar in appearance and behavior to the drug addicts that they were counseling. Take this picture, for example. Would you say that this is someone with a drug addiction or someone suffering from severe burnout? It's not that obvious, is it? And this is exactly what Herbert saw in the volunteers he was working with. He came to realize that the extreme emotional load they were under when counseling these people was causing a syndrome that he labeled burnout, basically stealing a term used to describe drug addicts in the 1970s. So how are we doing in sunny South Africa? Now, I'm going to try and visualize this, and it's going to be a bit difficult. Everyone's kind of like spread out all over the place, so this is going to be tricky. I'll have to come to the front for this. Okay. Would everyone on this side of my arm just stand up for 1 second? Just when you sit down, please remember to put your seat down again. This is roughly the proportion of people who reported that they feel burned out. Thanks, you can sit down again. 56% of respondents said they feel burned out. And you know what the scary thing is? We did this survey at the beginning of the year, after a supposedly relaxing December holiday. In 2018, there was another survey done by Blind on their platform, and they asked a simple question: do you feel burned out? And it's very interesting to note that 57% of people on their platform said they feel burned out. So it's very interesting that our survey with a much lower number of respondents, I think we got about 160, got about similar results than a survey with thousands of respondents from all over the world.
So I'm sure by now you would understand that burnout is not something that happens overnight. It happens over time, and it's a process. Now the next question might be, okay, but how do we go into burnout? And I want to say, if you understand this process, you will understand a great deal about burnout. And that could help with prevention and management of it. And that is basically the process, the relationship between resources, demands, and burnout. Now, similar to your bank account, you have another account that we call your emotional energy account. In this account, deposits are made as well as withdrawals. In this state, we will call the deposits resources and the withdrawals demands. Resources are those things that provide us with energy. They help us to reduce stress. Demands are things that can cause or increase stress, and it can also deplete our energy account. Ideally, you want your bank account there, in the positive. Sorry, your energy account in the positive, just like your bank account. Okay.
Especially your bank account.
I had to correct myself there. All right, but the problem comes when we go there, when we start to spend energy we don't have, and we run on fumes. And staying continually in that state can lead to burnout. Now, there's another model that was constructed by very clever people, Professor Arnold Bakker and Eva de Maruti and their associates. They call it the job demands resources model. And they explain the job demands, very good example. So I want you first to think about your job. Maybe list 2 things for yourself that cause stress. Now, there's a few examples. The first one, I think this is the easy one, is job overload, having too much work, and even job underload, not having enough work. Emotional demands, Riaan quickly touched on that. How do you feel when you work in a team that's not collaborating? Or when you have to work with an irate customer? That's emotional load, and that causes stress. Mental demands. How long sometimes would you take to solve a complex problem? Half a day, a week? That also causes stress on us. Role conflict. It's not nice to not know what's expected of you. And you'll spend a lot of energy trying to figure that out if it's not clear. What we also have to understand is demands are sometimes inherent to our job. So we can't always change it. Job resources are those things that have a motivational effect on us. And as I explained, it can reduce stress. Now, a few examples. Think about trust in your leadership. If you face a demand like uncertainty, and you have trust in your leadership, you can cope with that. If you don't have trust in your leadership, you can actually go into burnout if you spend too much energy on that. Team support. It's nice to work in an effective and cohesive team. Job control. We want autonomy. We also want to have some influence in decisions that affect our roles, that provide us with energy. Role clarity. It's good to know what's expected of you or where your role fits into your team or your environment. Then we also have personal resources. These are things that you can generate on your own. For an example, setting limits or boundaries, or being more optimistic, or your stress tolerance. Those are just a few examples. Now, talking about resources. Who here agrees with that? Stand up. Can you really stand up? Give a person next to you a high five and tell them you're not a resource. Okay. Yes, that's a good question. So we really feel very strong about this. We actually printed some badges. So if you want to join this awareness campaign, please come and get one after the talk.
The badge says I'm not a resource. So yeah.
Yes.
Wear it to work if you need to.
You can wear it for a year if you need to. Okay, so now that I have that off my chest, let's talk about red flags and indicators. How would you know if you are in a burnout process or not? There's a lot of indicators, but we're going to discuss the three main ones. Most of you would know about this one. Tiredness, really exhaustion, even after a good night's sleep. You'll normally see dark circles around the person's eyes. Very big word, depersonalization. This is where, so if you're in a burnout process, you tend to neglect your needs. And that then causes a disconnect from yourself. It also causes that you would distance yourself from other people. And that's what depersonalization is. So it's a total disconnect. The last one, there might be a lot of people experiencing this, and this is self-doubt. Now, a little self-doubt is good. It keeps us in check. It helps us to deliver quality work. But a lot of it can be quite dangerous. In this state, we can also lose our passion for our job. Now, how did we do in the IT burnout awareness survey? 66% of the people said, I feel very, very tired. 54% said that they have distanced themselves from other people. So we're sitting with people who feel disconnected. And 53% said they lost their passion for their job. Can you think about the implications of those people leaving the industry and go and look for other careers because of burnout? If we look at the total picture, Riaan previously mentioned that more than half of the people said, I feel burned out. 25% said that they are experiencing all three of the red flags. Considering this, do you agree that burnout is a burning issue? Okay. Let's go with Frank.
Oh, honey, please not again, pleaded Jess, Frank's wife. We've cancelled with Joe and Mary twice already in the last 3 months. Sorry, honey, I have to get this done, responded Frank, feeling irritated that he again finds himself in this situation. What will we tell them this time? Asked Jess, Frank now clearly hearing the frustration in her voice. You know, it's just as well, snapped Jess. Even when you're here, it's not like you're actually here. And what the heck is that supposed to mean? Frank barked back at Jess, the anger in his voice actually catching himself by surprise. However, deep down Frank knew exactly what Jess meant by that remark. It's like you don't want to be around me anymore. Even when you're with me, you don't want to talk to me. Frank could hear the emotion in Jess's voice, and suddenly a large portion of guilt was mixed in with his irritation, instantly transforming his frustration into anger. Well, if you really think that's the truth, maybe you don't know me at all, hissed Frank as he walked out and slammed the bedroom door. This is garbage, Frank yelled at Dave, the newbie at Acme Dev. Can you not see the cyclomatic complexity of this function is through the roof? Dave gave Frank a confused stare, which aggravated Frank even more. Didn't you cover this in college? You did go there, right? Was this tears welling up in Dave's eyes? What the heck is wrong with this guy? Frank thought and reminded himself that they had their standards, and the earlier Dave started adhering to them, the better for the project and the better for the team. Pour me one as well, won't you? Asked Jess jokingly, as Frank poured his second glass of scotch over the still remaining ice from his first round. He almost didn't hear her. Yeah, sure, he said inwardly as he grabbed another glass from the cupboard. Won't you join me? Jess asked as Frank handed her the glass. I just want to be alone for a bit, responded Frank as he slowly walked up the stairs to his study.
So who am I and who are you? Who are the people who are like Frank? The people who might be more prone to burnout than other people. So remember we said with the energy account, what can happen is when our demands are high and our resources are low, and we're running on fumes. But there's also a group of people who are more prone than other people to burnout. And they tend to do certain things. They follow certain habits. Before we discuss these 10 habits, let's just quickly see what a habit is. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a habit as an acquired mode of behavior that has become nearly or completely involuntary. So again, these definitions are quite difficult. So to make it easy, it's something we do automatically. It's something we may not be aware of. And it's also something we've learned somewhere. Now, as we're going to go through these 10 habits, please evaluate yourself. Ask yourself, do I tend to do these things? Number 1, we set very high expectations for ourselves and people around us. We sometimes experience self-doubt, maybe fearing that we don't know everything or that we may make a mistake. We're quite committed to our work and our companies. We're quite self-sufficient. We tend to rely more on ourselves and we don't really want to ask other people for help, or we're reluctant to delegate work, probably because they won't be able to do it like we do. Okay. High action orientation. That means things must be done now. Not even an email can wait until the morning. We're very busy. I won't say busy. Okay. Not only in our work life, but also our personal life. Sometimes you're so busy at work that maybe you don't even make time to go to the bathroom. Are you considered as the key staff member or the savior of your team or the organization you work at? They can always count on you to do more. Do you consistently far exceed expectations when they do your performance appraisals? Do you tend to be a bit hard on yourself when you make a mistake or when you face a setback? The last one. Do you find it difficult to relax or switch off after a busy workday? So, if you tend to do those things and you feel brave, I want you to raise your hand and I'll be the first one. And Riaan. Okay. So these are habits of high achievers. These are great qualities. And I can tell you that companies would give everything to appoint people who follow these habits because they're reliable and dependable. The problem comes when we tend to follow these habits and we don't have resources. So what can happen is high expectations can turn into unrealistic expectations. Commitment to your company is very good, but overcommitment can lead to you neglecting your own needs. A little self-doubt, as I said, is fine, but if it's in overdrive, it can cause fear and even aspects like imposter syndrome. So these things are part of our, basically part of our makeup. It could come from our childhood environment, people that we've admired, role models, wherever. So it's just important that we also balance these habits. Now, if you're a high achiever, we also have to ask ourselves, why do we push ourselves so hard? Even if we don't have resources, why are we willing to do that? Do we maybe tend to set unrealistic expectations for ourselves, or try to live up to other people's unrealistic expectations? Parents, spouse, a boss, any of those. Do we consequently try to be superheroes?
Okay, so before we start digging into the management and prevention of burnout, we thought it would be good to just quickly cover the burnout journey. Because you see, burnout is not a Boolean switch that you turn on or off. Basically, burnout is a journey involving a bunch of steps. And it's quite important to understand this because different steps in the journey will require different interventions. Now, for those of you who are familiar with these steps, you may have seen we've covered a lot of them, or we've covered some of them in the story of Frank. Now, most of us, if not all high achievers, will probably find ourselves somewhere on this journey. So it starts with a compulsion to prove. Like Tanya just said, a lot of us have this almost unrealistic superhero that we try to be. And we try to prove that we can be this person, not only to others, but also it's important to prove to ourselves that we can actually do this. We then start to work much harder than what is actually necessary, and we have trouble switching off when we are not at work. We start neglecting our basic needs, such as eating, sleeping, and even our relationships. At some point, we will start feeling jittery or panicky. Like we realize things are not out of place, but we can't really put our finger on it. And this makes us frustrated. At some point, we will start revising our values, and this is kind of like where it starts getting gnarly. Because what happens is we stop doing the things that we really enjoy, and through this, we actually start a disconnection process from ourselves, our true selves. And the moment we do this, we actually start distancing ourselves from other people as well. At some point, we may actually grow intolerant of the people around us. Now, when things start going wrong, and they will, we blame everyone and everything except for our work. At some point, we may actually also go into a withdrawal process where we reach out to things like drugs, sex, alcohol, whatever can actually make us feel better at that point in time. Our friends and family may notice our odd behavioral changes, and they may try to intervene. It may or may not help. I don't know who here has had an intervention before. Okay, maybe I'm the only one, but it sucks.
His mother got him.
Yeah, let's not even go there. At this point, the distancing process has actually reached critical levels, and we really don't care about our own needs anymore. And we actually have started devaluing everyone around us. This inner emptiness in us keeps on growing, and we feel worthless because we still struggle to attain this image of this person that we're trying to be. At some point, depressive thoughts will start setting in because we feel hopeless, and the only thing that we can see ahead of us is a bleak future. Then we hit burnout. Now, I don't know whom of you have actually Googled images for burnout before. Now, if you ever do that, typically what you'll find is people sitting at their desk, their hands in their hair, or other people throwing stacks of papers around in frustration. But unfortunately, in actuality, burnout usually results in a complete collapse. That will require extensive medical treatment to actually recover from. And also, you're probably looking at a long recovery period. For myself, even though I didn't go into full burnout, I would say it was probably about 1.5 years before I actually felt that I kind of felt recovered. So, if you Google, again, for advice on burnout, you will typically find things to do exercise, to eat healthy, to do things that you enjoy and that helps you relax and stuff like that. And those things are important, and we all should actually do them. However, I beg you, please take them in the context of these burnout steps that we've just shared, as not all of that information will actually, or interventions might actually be useful at that point in time. For example, go tell the person with depression to go run around. It's probably not going to yield the result that you're actually looking for. And for example, if you start displaying physical symptoms, please go see your doctor. He will refer you to a psychologist if needed. If you are a high achiever and you realize you display these habits and you also realize you don't really have control over them, or you actually come to recognize that you're actually in those early burnout stages, please go see an industrial or counseling psychologist. There's absolutely no shame in doing that, and they can actually help you with the tools to cope. I really hope we can start breaking the stigma around this type of things. And especially if you find that you don't feel like yourself anymore, or you have frequent mood swings, or you realize you're actually starting to display odd behavioral changes, or you have thoughts of hurting yourself, we beg you, please go speak to a medical professional. So, what did we do? More appropriately, what are we doing still? So, I have a bit of bad news for you. What we're about to share is not a silver bullet. As we've just explained, for a lot of you, and if you're on this thing, you're in a process, you've been walking down this journey for an amount of time. And what we're about to share will actually require you to stop, turn around, and actually start walking back on your way to recovery. There are no shortcuts. Well, none that we're aware of in any case. If any of you here know of any shortcuts, please let us know. That would be the best thing ever.
Yeah, we're really looking for that silver bullet. Okay, so before we can really start to prevent or recover from burnout, there's one very important step we need to take. And that is to look in the mirror, meaning we need to assess ourselves. Look at the stages and see where you are in form of the stages, the indicators as well. And I want to share a story, I see Justal is here, from my own life, to just maybe guide you a bit about this reflection. So a couple of years ago, I got a new boss. And I had a great relationship with my previous boss. I knew exactly where I stood. And I proved myself over the years. So I knew what value I added. Now, after many years, I had to go through this new process with this new boss. And normally my recipe worked well, you know, because I really had high standards. And I needed to prove myself. And what happened was, well, what made it a bit tricky was that I was always also pregnant. And I was really exhausted. I work extremely hard. I've put in so much effort. And the exhaustion might have been because of a pregnancy, but also the energy I spent to fulfill the demands of my role up to the expectations that I set. So, the baby was fine and is fine. He's turning 2 this year, for anyone who's worried. Someone actually asked me that. So, yes, and I was blessed not to go into a far burnout stage, but this took me on a road to actually take a hard look in the mirror. And I want you to do that. Ask yourself 3 questions. The one, do you tend to build that superhero-like image that we did? For an example, you're perfect, strive for perfection. You don't really want to show weakness, pain, or shame. That's one question. The second one, what are you willing to sacrifice to uphold that image? And the third question, is this who you want to be and strive to be, or is it the person you should be? So ask yourself those 3 questions, and we're going to work through this further.
Oh, still you.
We're just walking here, so okay. So the second one is more of a practical tip, and specifically if you want to prevent burnout. And that is to check your resources. This is in terms of emotional energy account. So the first thing you do is you go and make a list of the things that cause you stress. As I said, job overload, team support, any of those things. If you can't remove those and they're part of a job or the culture of a company, then you go and look at, okay, but what resources do I have available? Or what could I have access to? And if you have trust in your leadership, involve them in that process. Remember, the resources can offset the demands, and that can help us to prevent and recover from burnout. If there's any managers here, this is a very important message. It's extremely important to make sure that your people have the necessary resources.
Something that I've found extremely valuable, especially during the early burnout stages, is to remember the victories. Now, who in this room knows what imposter syndrome is? Okay. For those of you that really don't, imposter syndrome is basically a state of self-doubt where you basically seriously doubt your competency or whether you can do your job or not. Now, considering that definition, who in this room has had before or is currently struggling with imposter syndrome? You see, you are not alone. Now, for me, imposter syndrome was the main drive of what almost threw me off the cliff of burnout. You see, as we've mentioned earlier, it all starts with a compulsion to prove. Now, for me, that manifested in me believing that in order to be an excellent engineer and to remain employable, I had to be good at absolutely everything. Every time a new technology would pop up on the market, and just think about like how often JS frameworks pop up, I would add it to my never-ending list of things that I would need to read up on. Now, you see, the problem was that this actually had the opposite effect, because now my self-doubt was growing because I found it extremely difficult to digest this avalanche of information that I was throwing at myself. So lately, what I actually do when this annoying fear hits me, I've actually found it very valuable just to stop and remind myself of previous victories. You know, that time I came through for the team, that time I played a major role in rescuing a bleeding project, or even that time I was able to do something that I didn't think I could do. I also try to, just for a moment, focus and remember the things that I actually do know, instead of just reminding me of this gigantic list of things that I actually don't know. And also, I try to remember positive feedback that I've received earlier in my career. That's actually an extremely valuable resource to build your confidence. Now, everyone, do me a favor. Touch your ear. Now listen. What we are not saying is that high achievers should just give up and like strive for mediocrity. That's not what we're saying at all. Like, aiming for great things is awesome, and we should be doing that. However, please be realistic. Be kind to yourself, and also, very importantly, try and establish a pace that works for you in achieving great things.
As you are preventing burnout or you want to recover from burnout, wherever you are, it's important to slow down. So we're not saying that you need to go overboard and stop working or become a poor performer. That's not what we're saying. But you need to make sure that those habits are balanced. We also have to balance that high achievement drive, because that can sometimes then put us into a burnout process. I'm going to share what I did for an example in terms of those habits. So I have a very high action orientation, meaning things must be done now, and nothing can wait until the morning. And that gets you into a place where you work at night, where you work at weekends, and go early in the morning, and all of those things. And this actually caused some problems. So I needed to be kind to myself and put in some proper time management, call it skills. I had to discern between urgent and important, not urgent. Okay. And not everyone liked that. Some people want you to work like that, and they rather want that thing in their inbox when they come in the morning in the office, instead of waiting maybe 2 or 3 hours for that work. So you may have to make some unpopular decisions. You even may have to set some boundaries and sometimes say no. It's not easy. But it's all worth it at the end.
Okay. Now, I believe it was Martin Fowler who once said that if you can't change your company, then change your company. Now, the advice of changing your company, or specifically moving to a different company, it actually ended up, as we started preparing for this talk, we actually realized We're sharing this more as a caution than actually what we do as advice. Now, moving to a different company is something that I've had to do at one stage to escape an environment that was having a very negative effect on me personally. However, you need to be aware that this comes with its own set of stresses. For example, actually also, if you are a high-achieving individual and you don't have control over those habits, there's a very good chance that your problems may just actually follow you to your next company as well. Therefore, we would actually like to advise everyone, like if you find yourself in a situation and you cannot cope, like if you have any kind of trust in your leadership, go and talk to them. They may not even be aware of the situation you find yourself in. However, if you find yourself in a company with a toxic, pathological culture that risks harming you, then, and you actually have no other option, then we would definitely advise you to maybe look for something else.
Now, some of you might ask yourself, what is a pathological company culture? And it's basically a company that's very power-oriented, and they tend to keep the resources on the leadership level, but don't really share the resources with the people who need to do the work. So I hope that clarifies it for you. Okay, so this is where we're really going to get real and a bit deep, but we really hope you're going to learn something today. The next step is to reconnect. You would remember when we discussed the indicators and the burnout stages that there's a lot of disconnection that happens. Disconnection with ourselves and distancing from other people. So this is now the opposite of a burnout process. First of all, you need to be kind to yourself. Consider yourself in terms of your needs. Make sure you don't neglect your needs. Secondly, consider yourself when you make decisions or commitments. Be realistic. Don't be careful to overcommit. And then the last part is, if you are someone like us who created that image, the superhero person who can do everything for everyone, you will need to start working on that and take it off layer by layer. Also, you'll have to identify the reason for the compulsion to prove. And Riaan will share in the next slide his story of the process that he went through with that. Once you are a balanced and whole person, you're ready to connect with other people.
So, confronting the lies. This is probably the thing that had the biggest impact on my turnaround, like on my burnout journey. It was the hardest thing that I ever had to do and still have to do. You see, at one point in time, I had created for myself a world fabricated out of my fears. I had created a reality where I was convinced that I was not good enough, and that it was only a matter of time before I would be found out as a fraud, that I would lose my job, and that I could no longer support my family. You see, for the longest time, I had built my self-worth and my confidence around my competence. And having that shattered at my place of work had a severely negative impact on me personally. You see, this fear of losing my job caused me to work harder and harder and harder, as I desperately sought some positive feedback, just to try and balance this crushing imposter syndrome I was experiencing at the time. Now, at this point, I was not only afraid of losing my job, but I was completely convinced that I would probably not find a good job anywhere else either. Now, I think for a lot of you, this probably sounds ridiculous, but for me, that was my reality. That was the only thing I saw. I felt trapped and I felt hopeless. I remember at my darkest times, I often had thoughts of killing myself as I saw myself as a complete failure as a human being. It was during that time where I realized that I had come to a crossroad in my life. I could either continue down this road and probably end up dead, or I had to reevaluate, who I was, who I needed to be, and what I actually really valued as important. First of all, I had to see myself as more than just a provider for my family. They actually needed my person, my presence, and my there-ness more than what they needed me just to put food on the table. Secondly, I had to see myself as more than just an engineer. I didn't have to be the best in the world in order to be valuable for a company. I had to accept the fact that I was a human being, a mixture of talents and abilities, and to actually focusing on finding that mix and honing on that to the benefit of my team could actually be extremely valuable. And also, I had to redefine for myself what it means to be successful, and I had to, through that process, stop fearing failure. I'm happy to report that all of this gave me the courage to actually put my feet out there and actually take a chance and go find a more suitable position for myself. And I was surprised to find that I was actually able to find something with relative ease. And the great thing was, it was at a company where I had the space to work through a recovery process. Now, as you've mentioned earlier, none of this happened like in a week or whatever. It wasn't a quick thing. It was a process. But hey, so is personal growth, and so is life. As Frank was staring into blank space, sipping his scotch, he realized his phone was buzzing. He looked at the screen and saw the call was coming from Joe, probably his oldest and closest friend. "Hey man," Frank answered the phone in a neutral tone. "Hey Frank," responded Joe. "How are things with you?" Frank could hear that Joe was trying to sound upbeat, but Frank could hear a definite tone of concern in his voice. Suddenly Frank had to fight back the tears. His life was a mess. He hated every second. Everything that used to give him joy was coming in the way of him succeeding in his career. A career he now hated with everything in him. "Yeah, I'm doing fine, man. Same old, Frank responded the moment he composed himself. Frank awoke from the painful throbbing in his head. He could vaguely remember movement around him, but could not make out any detail. "I don't know what happened," he heard Gabby cry. "He was on his way out and just collapsed as he reached for the door." Frank tried to speak, but only managed to mouth the words. His surroundings were slowly coming into focus, and he realized that he was lying on his back, looking up at the signage of AcmeDev installed in their reception area. "A better future for everyone." He read the words, supposedly what they were striving for. "How are you feeling today?" asked Dr. Alice as Frank was trying to get comfortable in his seat. Frank waited a bit before answering, as Dr. Alice, he's a science psychologist, asked him previously to be honest in his responses. He was still very tired, but he was thankful that his collapse was not because of a stroke or worse. He was diagnosed with severe burnout and was forced to take a couple of months medical leave. He was looking forward to seeing Jess again that afternoon, the first time that they would be spending time together since she moved out 6 months before. "I feel okay," said Frank. "I feel good about feeling okay." Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for attending the talk. What we really hope is that you are left with hope. This is kind of a dark subject, and like you cannot really like make it too light. But there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and we really hope that everyone can see that. So I'm not sure how much time there's left. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions. But I also realize that this is quite a like touchy subject for a lot of people. So if you have some questions you'd rather ask in private, we will be around here. Thank you. So any questions? Oh, sorry.
Or if you've got questions, yeah, get the microphone from me over there. No, you might not need it, but we're recording this, so for the sake of those that watch the film afterwards.
I hope this question's amazing.
I'm sure it will be.
I picked up a strong correlation between burnout and what sounds like self-esteem. Am I right, or did I misread that?
I'll let the professional answer that question.
So self-esteem, your self-esteem will be affected by burnout because of that self-doubt. So in your normal, if you're not in burnout, your self-esteem should be healthy. But the burnout can negatively affect your self-esteem. Does that make sense for you?
That I meant it in the opposite way, though. I picked up that low self-esteem may cause burnout indirectly. Did I read that wrong, or because that's what it looked like? It looks like a lot of self-doubt, which seems to relate to bad self-esteem, will result in a lot of the overachiever type behavior.
Yeah, if I could actually, I think that's part of it. And I think that's kind of like, that was my journey and what I experienced in any case. However, I think there might be people in situations that's just like almost a situation is forced upon them. However, when you actually start, and I think it actually starts getting dangerous if you're not so much trying it to prove it to others, but to actually prove it to yourself, because as we know, we are all our harshest critics for the most time. So I think a lot of us, we find it almost difficult to satisfy our own expectations.
I just want to ask, in your experience, what was like the, from your company's perspective? So was that overachieving visible to them? Were they like, great, that 10 hours of work, awesome for like 8 months?
Yeah, so what I've tried very hard to do in this whole thing was like try not to put blame on the company. I think there was definitely some cultural factors. Almost this thing that we're talking about, Frank, like the experiences that he went through, if there's stuff that he doesn't know, there's almost this thing, oh, we expect you to know this. And like, if you ever want to kick someone with imposter syndrome, if you really want to hurt them, you have to say, you have to actually just say 4 words. You should know this. It really hurts, especially if you're already dealing with self-doubt. So it could be like from their perspective, they were just like expressing a need, but they were expressing it in some very unhealthy ways. And that actually caused me to maybe misinterpret it completely. So it just drove me down this thing earlier, or actually further. Does that answer your question? Not really. Okay, sorry. So I think there was someone at the back.
Maybe you can come and talk to us afterwards, and
Yeah,
we can just
please,
have a quick chat.
Yeah, if you think you know of someone who's going down that road, but for whatever various reasons, their work environment, you know, is toxic, but they cannot get out of it, like how would you help them steer more clear?
So that's a choice that each one of us must make. And the problem with burnout is a lot of our stages seem quite visible now, but when you go through it, you don't see it, because the only thing you're focusing is work. I would say take a supportive role, specifically if it's a spouse or someone close to you, not to try to diagnose them and say, listen, you have burnout, you know. Rather take a supportive role, and that's what happened with us. I said to Riaan, listen, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? Because else you will become the target. Even if it's a friend. The person who's attacking the work can become the target. Does that help?
Oh, you're at the front. Yeah, someone grab that one.
You mentioned one of the things which is important for us to do is focus on the victories. How do you manage to focus on the victories when some of those victories were occurred because of the bad habits you've been developing over the years? Or maybe you could get a victory because you worked 12 hours that day. How do you balance that out?
That is a very good question, and it's not something I've actually thought of at all, so I'm going to try and wing an answer here. So the thing is, for me, if I had to just answer it, I would say it was still me that did it, even though I worked myself half to death to actually achieve those victories. You know, it just kind of reminds me that I'm not stupid, I'm not incompetent. I actually have it in me to do these things. The only problem is a lot of those victories I achieved in a much shorter time period that was actually healthy. So I need to remind myself, listen, I can actually do this, I just need to give myself a bit more time to make sure I remain healthy. That's another question.
So we'll make this the last question, and then after this, we will wrap up the session. And downstairs, there's mingling and drinks and what have you. And the two will be available also afterwards for some more personal discussions.
I'm curious, you're speaking about burnout at an IT development conference. Do you believe that this is something that IT developers are like more prone to get? And if so, what part of IT do you think that is?
Well, if I can quickly just say that, yeah, I think the biggest thing is why we actually, because I work in IT, that's kind of like what I've went through. And there's some people I've talked to that kind of like, it seems like a lot of people are on almost a similar kind of journey. But I wouldn't say that IT is necessarily the most, or the job, or actually the industry that's most susceptible to this. There's definitely other industries as well, like for example, if you look at the medical industry, this is actually where the whole process, or actually the whole thing about burnout started. Like in the 1970s when they defined burnout, for a long period, I think it was longer than 10 years, it was mostly only a medical related thing. They only thought like doctors and nurses and people like that could actually get to burnout. It's only later, I think it's in the 80s, they actually started doing research and actually found a lesson, but wait a minute, like there's other industries as well that that's acceptable to burnout as well. Because if you look at those demands that Tanya actually talked about, those are demands that you find in various types of industries. And obviously, the more demanding an industry actually is, the more people in that industry will actually be susceptible to burnout. And when it comes to like the roles, we've actually found in the survey that I'm trying my best to remember now exactly, but I think the spread was almost equal. It doesn't matter if it was management or a tester or whatever. And I think there's actually something that we didn't really cover in the talk, and there's actually it's a cool slide that was titled "The Dark Side of Agile," and Tanya also talked about emotional demands, and a lot of us. And it's actually emotional demands come through when you have to deal with people in a frequent basis. And a lot of us actually now, if you work in an agile environment, a lot of it actually requires you to engage with people for an entire day. And it's extremely exhausting. And if we don't have the right cultural factors in place to actually give people the resources to be able to deal with those demands, you could actually make things just a heck of a lot worse. I can add something.
If you think, for an example, about the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, those people can also, because you can see from the demands. And if you give us your email address, I can send you an article that I recently found. Someone else asked me that as well. And I've also consulted with people from different industries. So I don't think it discriminates, if I can say it in that way.
I'm sure we all found this very interesting. for them, another round of applause.
Thank you.